Welcome to Association Chat, an online discussion where we warm ourselves by the virtual fire with topics of the day, welcoming thought leaders and trailblazers alike to join up in this online home for the community. I'm the host. I am the host of Association Chat, KiKi L'Italien. And I have to ask you, are you keeping up with what you need to know about all of the privacy regulations and the requirements that are out there for organizations within the United States and beyond? I don't know if you are, if it's possible. I do know some people who are very focused in that. And so today we are going to jump into a topic that I think will be of interest to many of you and is certainly important to many of you. And with that, I'm going to bring on my wonderful guests because some of you have met a few of these faces, a couple of these faces before. There might be one that's new to you. But we're going to just jump right into it, and I'm going to ask my wonderful guests to introduce themselves, and we'll start right up here with David Clarke. David Clarke.
Hi, thank you, KiKi. Yeah, David Clarke. I've got a background in cybersecurity and data protection, working for quite a few FTSE 100 to 50 companies, and the last few years been working as CTO in the Trust Bridge, dealing with kind of companies of all different sizes everywhere around the world, focusing on data protection and cybersecurity.
Wonderful. Can we go to Penny Hayes?
Yes, thanks, KiKi, and thank you for having us again. The Trust Bridge, David and I have been working together now for about 6 years, together with some other colleagues, and we set up the Trust Bridge to help organisations, including quite a few professional associations in the UK and in the US, to go through the minefield of the data protection rules and regulations, which are complex to say the least. And we've been helping them implement a lot of their policies and processes, training their staff, that sort of thing. And just about every year, well, just about every month, actually, something new pops up. And relatively recently, a few things have changed. So we thought it'd be time to talk to you about some of the new changes.
All right. And we have moved to Malcolm Dowden. Hello.
Hi, KiKi. Yes, my name is Malcolm Dowden. I'm a lawyer practicing in the area of data protection and cybersecurity and digital assets. I'm a partner in Squire Patton Boggs, which is a US-based law firm. So I'm spending a lot of my time helping US-based organizations to understand the obligations, the risks, the compliance mechanisms that come with things like Europe's GDPR and California's CCPA, CPRA, how those things fit together and how it's possible to put in a streamlined, quite consistent, cogent compliance routine.
All right. And today is going to be a little bit different because typically my audience knows that if you're watching, I am asking questions and sort of driving the conversation. But I want to give the experts a chance to really talk about this. This is their field of expertise and their area of knowledge. And, I have to admit, when GDPR came along, I was paying rapt attention and really, really looking at what are the outcomes that are going to happen with all of the associations within the United States specifically. When you're taking in information and you're storing it and you're responsible for this information, how do we know that it's safe? What are the requirements on making sure that we're building that trust with our members and with our stakeholders? And actually, what are the legal requirements too? So, I paid a lot of attention at that point. It seemed very, very scary. The deadline for everything to take effect came, and then it went. And then we started hearing stories, and then it kind of sort of drifted off. But in the States, we saw different states passing their different rules. And so now we have WISP. What is WISP? Why is it that we need to pay attention to WISP? I am concerned about WISP, but I don't even know how concerned to be about WISP. Talk to me, walk me through it. Tell me what we need to know.
Okay. KiKi, one of the things that it's very important for us to work together with lawyers such as Malcolm, we've worked with him now for many years, is because lawyers do tend to tell you what you need to do. And then we come along behind them and actually tell you how to do it, how to actually implement some of those legal requirements. And I think you're absolutely right. It is a moving feast. There are a number of states now who've actually made the WISP, which stands for a Written Information Security Program, a legal requirement. I think it's about half the US states actually have now required people to do this. And it is basically a statement, a very large statement, that tells any external organization and employees as well that you have all the right security and data protection processes and policies in place. And I think it's a very important document. The environment in which this has been launched, if you like, is a very interesting one. First of all, lots and lots of data breaches occurring, more and more. We're seeing more and more all the time. But on the back of that, we're seeing a lot of third-party contractors or suppliers actually being asked to put together a document, to answer a questionnaire in some cases, by organisations, by their client companies, to show that they actually have these right security processes and policies in place. And this can be part of a pitch document. If you're an agency coming along looking for a new client, it can be a questionnaire that's given to virtually any organisation. And David, we've been finding these, some of our clients have had these, they've been up to 200, 300, 400 page long questionnaires that they've been asked to actually prove that they actually have got the processes and policies in place and they're complying with the laws that they need to comply with.
And David, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, yeah, it's kind of what we're seeing a huge amount of this, probably more so in the last couple of years, where the increasing amount of due diligence questions are coming up. And what we're also sort of finding is it's a requirement of kind of government and regulators that actually you have evidence that you've written down, you know, so you may be doing a load of good stuff, but actually if it's not written down, approved by, you know, senior people in the company, you don't really have the evidence to say, yes, it is being done. And part of the issue is that it's a bit like going to the gym, much of this. It's if you go to the gym once, does it kind of make you strong and fit? Probably not, you know, unless you're really lucky. And monitoring cyber and data protection, adjusting what you've got, making sure you have those layers of defense, managing risk, having the right people responsible, all needs to be kind of managed, you know, continuously. And one of the underlying things is that because technology unfortunately gets better all the time, it changes, it also means that these plans need continuous improvement all the time, so that if something isn't being done, it can be improved. So it's not really static, it just looks static. You know, we've found, you know, things like background checks are getting much more sort of, you know, serious. I mean, they've always been relatively serious, but they're getting much more detailed. It's okay if you appoint somebody, but actually, how do you make sure that that person who you've appointed understands what they need to do? How do they evidence what they need to do? How do they make sure the whole company and the staff know what to do? And that's where much of this, you know, the plan comes in, you know, so you can manage the policies. From the policies, you can then manage the evidence. You know, we noticed in a lot of the documentation, they talk about concepts like non-conformance. And generally, a non-conformance means you have a policy that says you do something, and if you're not doing it, that will be a non-conformance. So it's actually measuring yourself against what your own policies say. And the policies they're there to protect the company and the staff. Because quite often, if the staff don't know what they need to do,
this concept of the WISP is really a summary document, and it does reference lots of evidence in the background. So, but the ones that we've been working on, really, it is a summary document, and then you have to have all the supporting documentation there. So many of the people we've been working with, the first stage of that is to identify any gaps in any of their security policies and data protection policies, and even in the training. So once we've identified the gaps, then we can put together a WISP for them. But Malcolm, it's a classic case, isn't it, that half the states in the US have asked for this as a legal document, but it's not a federal requirement.
Absolutely. I think we're still some considerable way off having any federal data protection and privacy laws. There's some progress in the House over the last couple of weeks, but it's not the sort of driver that you have in Europe with GDPR, for example. And that's really not necessarily what we should be waiting for anyway. I think one of the sort of traps that organizations tend to have fallen into here is, as KiKi was saying, GDPR was big news back in 2018. It was viewed as the big compliance deadline. And then all of a sudden stories start to trail off. But what I'm seeing is that while data breach might be a low probability event, it's low probability, high impact. And if an organization is hit, for example, with ransomware attacks, then that's the moment you realize that there isn't the underlying culture of understanding security measures. There isn't the clear understanding of how roles and responsibilities are allocated. And crucially, that's the moment you realize that in the C-suite, at the top of the organization, there hasn't been that acceptance of responsibility. So retrospectively, it all looks sort of important. It amplifies the fact that the organization hasn't protected itself. So I think using this not as a kind of tick box compliance, but as a way of building a culture is the better approach.
And you're absolutely right. The thing that the WISP tends to do is focus the senior management team on what they have got and more importantly, what they haven't got. And it's really interesting to us that it's been the CEOs and chief executives of organizations that have come to us to say, and actually quite a lot of them, as a result of a cyber breach, have come to us and said, we've realized that we need to have this in place. And what we've also realized is that we've got lots of gaps. And you are talking 4 years, nearly 5 years after some of the data protection rules came into place. So it's been a very interesting process over the last few months, looking at whether WISP has become another focus for people's attention. Definitely.
There was something that you said, Malcolm, about how it impacts the culture. And, I think that there has been, especially just because over the past few years, we've had so much happening with the pandemic, and then of course, climate change, and of course, the war in Europe. I mean, we have so many things that have taken hold and sort of just forced our attention, that sometimes it can seem that something like the WISP, right, it is not as important to pay attention to. But what I've found in working with organizations, particularly with their boards and governance, is that right now there are a lot of questions about, well, how do we cultivate this culture of trust? How do we rebuild trust or build trust when there's so much uncertainty in the world? And what you're speaking to right now is one of those things. It's one of those activities where an organization can say, this is how we're making decisions. This is the work that we're doing. We're doing what we're supposed to. You can trust in us and our decision-making ability to do what we're supposed to do what we need to do to ensure, that we're not only meeting expectations, but we're on top of things. We are making, and that's representative of all of our decisions. Now, is that accurate? We can only cross our fingers and hope. But this is one of those examples of an action that can be a trust building action that organizations can take.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I very often say to client organizations is we need to get to a position where compliance is actually just a nice byproduct of the fact that you understand the data flows within your organization, that you understand the nature of the sort of cyber threats that exist, and that you've taken measures to defend the personal information in particular of those who need to be able to trust your organization. It is about that kind of relationship building. and relationship maintenance. And it's not, again, something I find myself saying a lot as a lawyer, it's not just law. This is really about making sure that your compliance function is a cultural driver. It's part of your...
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about these concerns for all organizations. What do we need to be looking at? What do we need to be aware of?
I think one of the earlier slides was talking about the environment where so many data breaches tend to happen within the third-party chain. We're dealing with something at the moment. Actually, it was a patch that wasn't applied properly, and so on a system, so something was able to get in to the organisation. But it is often the third party that you're transferring your data to for whatever reason. It could be the employee's pension system, or the employee, or an external HR company, something like that. And that's where you have to be absolutely sure that you've got the same level of security in place in a third-party organisation with whom you're sharing data as in your own, what you would expect to have in your own organisation. And that's where some of these due diligence questionnaires have been coming up recently for organisations to ensure that their third-party supply chain is compliant. So I think that's really the primary concern, is that even if you think you've got your own house in order, it's making sure that, you know, your next door neighbours and the people that you're talking to also have all of their houses in order. That's, for me, probably one of the biggest concerns that we've come across. Malcolm, you may find other things.
Well, just to endorse that, I think one of the things that we've seen very often in practice in response to due diligence questionnaires are a whole set of responses that say, yes, we have this particular technical certification. We have ISO 27001, for example, and I keep having to say that's part of an answer to one of the questions. You always have to think that information security is technical, it's organizational, and it's human risk. So it's looking at the way that those factors interact. The most common data breach that I see, and I see this pretty much every night on my way home from work, are people on the train who've got their laptops open. They've got post-it notes on the screen with their username and password on it. You know, it's, so, you know, that's a cultural point.
Absolutely. And that training itself is so important, to make sure that everybody that has any access to any information in the organisations understands where potentially they could be breaching the rules and regulations. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to dig into a specific case where I know that over the past few years, because of the pandemic, there are so many organizations that had to purchase software and work with third parties in new ways, especially with events and things like that, to figure out ways to put a lot of their annual meetings and learning and education online to make it available to their members. And because of that, I don't know, because they were such a rush and an urgency, I'm not sure that a lot of people asked a lot of questions about, well, how is this data stored and who owns it and how long, you know, will it take if somebody asks to have their information removed? And how do we know that that's been removed once we request it? And to be quite honest, I work in some digital strategy work, and I don't know that I have any clients asking me about that. Should I be concerned? What should I be telling? Should I be saying, ask these questions of these? What do you think I should do? Give me advice.
Yes, you should be asking. That's a simple answer.
Like, be worried about this. Yeah, I mean, you know, it is. People made these quick decisions, and they're trying. Even if they're trying to get their houses in order, there are so many third parties that it seems like to get good responses and to feel confident in those responses on questions regarding privacy and data control. It seems just almost insurmountable.
It is. It is, and it is a gradual process. So the way that we would kind of tend to work with companies is, and they may well have hundreds, if not thousands, of suppliers, is which ones are absolutely critical to your business that if they got switched off now, yeah, you would have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And in most companies, it's not that many when it comes down to it that you would actually suffer if they were turned off right now. So on those ones, you can work out a plan, you can work out alternatives. Do you need to buy higher availability? Do you need to buy better backup solutions, to get back so your business can run? We've seen so many companies that, at midnight they had a business, yeah, and by 2 a.m. they no longer have a business, and the telephone system doesn't work because it was all part of their infrastructure. So it's really, if they had that on their kind of critical list, so at least those can be reviewed regularly and kept up to date. And literally that was part of the problem. None of their firewalls were patched, their software was not updated, they'd forgotten that they had a few accounts they'd given to a third party 5 years previously, and that's actually where the attack came from. Somebody exploited the third party, who then used the accounts from this company that had not been used for 5 years, and ransomware took hold really, really quickly.
And sadly, that tends to be when people wake up to this and say, oh, I should have been doing that. It's when the breach happens. And we've seen this time and time again, that so much resource is then thrown in the direction of the breach response or the incident response, which could have been better used in the first place to actually build the policies and processes that they should have had to protect themselves. But sadly, it's that classic list of priorities, and it becomes a priority as soon as a breach happens, and that's when the attention is focused upon it. Which is why this whole concept of the WISP is very interesting, because of whose responsibility it is. It's the responsibility of the board of directors. It's part of their governance, and therefore really they have to focus on that. And it's causing them to look around and say, well, we better check what we've got and what we haven't got. And that's the sort of first initial process they go through. And we're quite delighted about that in some respects, because that's something we've been preaching for quite a long time, that the senior team needs to be the one that takes responsibility for this, or at least gets involved. And now they're being forced to do so in certain places, which we're quite pleased about.
Yeah, and part of the WISP is that you must have risk management, and it's using risk management as a tool as a guide, rather than here's the list and these are our risks and we'll look at them every sort of 6 to 9 months. Using risk as a tool where you can see the trends, highlight the areas. An example is customers will ask us, say, yeah, we use multi-factor, and then we'll say, does everybody have multi-factor? And they'll go, no, but most people do. And that's sort of like having a boat with a big hole in. Yeah, it's sort of waterproof. Most of the boat is waterproof except for this big hole. And unfortunately with cyber, you could argue it does reduce your threat area, but really all it does is maybe add a bit of a delay before that hole is found, and then that hole gets exploited. So it's, the closer you can get to 100%, the safer it will be. It's like, yes, I only have a boat with a small hole. Yeah, it kind of works for a while.
But I think as well, David, it's a question of understanding how the regulators, how the supervisory authorities are thinking about these things. And they are pragmatic, they're realistic enough, in my experience, to recognize that no organization is going to have perfect information security. Every step towards compliance is therefore worthwhile. Every step towards risk management is worthwhile. And if you look at the examples of breaches that are reportable, that are notifiable under GDPR, there's a really good example of a ransomware attack that is not considered reportable because it's not considered high risk to data subjects. And it's nothing to do with the law that makes the difference. The question is, does the organization have backups that are kept logically and physically separate? If you're hit with a ransomware attack, does that attack gain access to data that is already encrypted? Because if it is, if it's exfiltrated, if it's taken out,
It's
well,
still
all that's
encrypted.
been taken out is encrypted.
Yeah.
Can you fail over from one system to the next so that anyone, for example, association members who need to gain access to their data are not locked out from it? And, you know, so that's not law, that is practicality. And one of the hallmarks of this whole regime is looking at things in a practical, real world, risk managed way.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. And you know, I have to, I just, the more we're talking about this, the more it reminds me about, you know, this point of making people feel safe, making them feel like, and I know we go back to the trust and it's the trust bridge and all of that, but I don't think it can be overstated because during a time when there is such concern about is my data safe? Is this a trustworthy organization that is taking all precautions that it needs to? And if something should go wrong, how can we mitigate that risk? And that should be a concern for everyone, certainly the governance, certainly those people who are serving in the executive positions, who are supposed to show responsibility and guidance, and for the membership and the volunteers who are involved as well as customers. So I want to talk a little bit about, you know, more about this why. The slide was here, and it's so why go ahead and do this? Because why should we, if we're not being forced to contend with this right now, then why should we do it? Because certainly I know the pushback. I heard it with GDPR, which, you know, it was like, oh, finally, there's some regulation with teeth. We need to pay attention, you know. And I heard the pushback then, which is, yeah, these rules come along every now and then, and everyone gets worried, but it really doesn't end up having that. I mean, have you heard that too over time, over the years? Yeah. So for those people who are out there right now, who are saying to their screens or watching this or listening to it on the audio later, and they're saying, yeah, we've heard this all before. Why should we pay attention now? Let's answer that question. Why?
I think one of the areas that we've seen quite a few times is a company will talk to us and we'll go, you know, ideally you should have these type of policies, procedures, and evidence for them in place. And they'll go, no, don't worry. We know our investors really well. They'll pump in the money. They're all good guys. We don't really need that type of thing. Literally, we've had a call within 2 days. You know, that stuff you were talking about, we kind of need it in place ASAP. Otherwise, we can't get further investment. We can't get the business. Government departments, especially large companies, will almost certainly insist on it now. And so really, it's actually, you know, we reckon, I don't know kind of what the value is, Penny, but I think we're responsible for finishing off a lot of sales.
Well, that couldn't have been finished. That's the sort of practical reasons why people should do this. We found a number of things, especially going through the due diligence process with clients, that if they're trying to sell the business or looking for investment, quite often it will affect the valuation of that business, depending on what is found during that process and with what's in place in terms of compliance. We hate using that word, but compliance to rules and regulations. We've also had people come to us say, oh, I've just lost a pitch. I've just lost a client because I can't prove that I have all of these things in place. So how do I go about doing it? And you know, that's where something like a WISP that is a statement to the outside world that this is what I have in place. And by the way, here's the evidence that I have them in place. We're not talking about opening up the entire documents and the entire processes and displaying all the secrets, but certainly to prove that you have a number of policies and processes in place is quite a critical part of the process of doing business with new clients or even prospects and existing clients. So from a practical perspective, there are a number of reasons why I think clients and companies and organizations are now looking at this with more relevance, really. But I think for us, we see that organizations that have something like this in place give a greater perception to the outside world, give a greater level of confidence to their employees, to their contractors, to their third-party supply chain, to their customers, to their members, that actually they're looking after that data, that personal data, in a far better way. So it's that sort of level of confidence that that we can see on your trust. Would you rather go for somebody who's got this than somebody that hasn't got it in a sort of competitive, advantageous position? Just an aside, we are also aware that some of the regulatory authorities are developing a certification and accreditation for organisations to look at the data protection cybersecurity processes, and then to accredit an organisation once they've been through an audit. And we've been working with the regulator here in the UK to do something very similar to that. And that will also be then another practical reason. Oh yeah, well, we've got the accreditation and certification and you haven't. Sounds a bit sort of schoolyardish, but it's that kind of level of confidence that one organisation will have over another.
Absolutely. If I can come at that from a slightly different angle, I've spent far too many weekends over the last couple of months involved in breach response. And I've seen organizations that have in the short term lost a lot of functionality and money, and they've lost a huge amount of trust. So that's the negative reason. But I always come back to the positive reason that if an organization understands the data that really it relies upon, the data that is the lifeblood of its operations, then it's in a position to unlock value. It's in a position to enhance value. So I think if you want to get to that sort of beneficial place, taking these practical risk managed measures is the way to arrive at a point where, as I said earlier, compliance is a nice side effect of actually understanding your data and your security measures.
Well, and I think I think it's so important to remember that with nonprofits. So if we're talking about say charity organizations or something like that, so often people are asking more questions about, look, should I be donating to a place? Are they smart with my money? Is this going where it needs to be? And if they're not being safe with the data, if they're not taking those protocols, the chance that all of those donations can get siphoned off due to ransom attacks, ransomware attacks, and all kinds of other things, that's there. And any sort of barrier to feeling safe about where you're putting your money is going to put that bit of doubt and that barrier to somebody making a decision to give. Same with organizations that are trade organizations or scientific organizations, these societies that we have in the nonprofit realm that are focused on showing that again, the reason that they get a tax break in the United States is because they're supposed to be doing something that the government can't. And they are supposed to be showing this responsibility to one area or another, performing that duty, that mission-focused duty, whether it be surrounding a particular industry or supporting a particular science or what have you. So many different types of associations, but it all falls back into that responsibility, that fiduciary responsibility that a board of directors has, that responsibility that the executives have in an organization to show great care for the data and, of course, the finances surrounding an organization and association. And I just want to remind everyone of that, because when we start thinking about things from a compliance perspective, it can seem like just checking the box. But this actually speaks to that underlying sense of, are you competent to handle the responsibility that you have? Do I trust my engagement with you to be something where I know that investment of time and energy and resources is going to be well placed? And the fewer barriers we have to building that relationship, the better. So that was my that was my big. I'm
Strongly
sorry.
agree.
I look like.
I think in the association world, we've seen this where you have obviously members, and the members need to be sure that their personal data, and there will be a lot of personal data about the members, is kept in the right place. But beyond that, there are the sponsors, for example, of association events, whether they be online or offline, and you know, one of the key non-dues revenue stream is obviously sponsorship for a lot of the associations. But are you absolutely sure that if you're sharing data with sponsors, have you got the consent of the members to do that? But also, are they keeping it in the best possible state as well? If they got the right security in place? So I would suggest that a lot of the associations should also be asking the questions of their third-party supply chain for the WISP, or go through a due diligence questionnaire process as part of their onboarding, because they need to be aware that they're responsible for their members' data and where it then goes to, and who it's shared with. So as part of best practice within the association world, we would very much advise that this is pretty critical.
Well, let me ask a follow-up question of each of you, because I'd be curious to hear what your advice is. It might be very similar. So if somebody gives the response you are going to give, then try to build off of that. But what would be the very next steps that somebody watching this or listening to this program that they should take after learning more about this? What do you think the very next thing, the right next step would be?
David?
Yeah, I think probably the important thing is to work out and agree the scope and the size and the quantum of the issue. And I think once that's done, it's a lot easier then to break it down into chunks. And sometimes the scope may not finish for a long time. On a big company, in reality, the scoping never stops. But you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start at, yes, we can do this. We can do this at a first strike layer, get that done, work out the risks, even if they're very, very kind of basic, and it can always be improved. And it's a lot easier to improve, even if it's your own framework, than having nothing to work from. And that's normally a good starting point to go from 0 to 100%. And I think I'm quoting from Malcolm here. Yeah, nobody's 100%, probably not even close. But at least, getting on the journey there is probably the most important thing.
And I think for me, it's actually, we're still finding that a lot of organisations don't know what their data map is. They don't know where their data is going, the data they're collecting, where it's going, where it's stored, who's it shared with, how long it's retained for. Do they need all this information? So again, it's looking at their data map, their data flow, and understanding that. And that's really pretty fundamental to then be able to put processes and policies in place. If you don't know what data you've got and where it is, then how can you even begin to start protecting it?
Absolutely. And just to hopefully build on that, one of the fundamental questions in pretty much any of the data protection and privacy laws is, why are we holding this data? So from a GDPR perspective, that's called the purpose test. And an awful lot of organizations over the years have been holding data just because they're holding data. There isn't that sense of purpose and of understanding what the data might be for. So an awful lot of data management actually might very well be data deletion, reducing the scope of the data that you're holding and therefore reducing your attack surface. If you are involved with holding very large quantities of data, applying sophisticated data analytics, then it's understanding what the purpose and the outcomes are from that exercise. Compliance shouldn't be the first thought. Understanding what the data is for should be the first thought.
That's such a rational, practical response. I can't tell you how refreshing it is to hear, because as people get so excited about the wonderful things we can do with machine learning and talking about our big data, so often it's the small data. We're not even taking care of the little questions, much less why are we talking about all of these things that are out here when we can't even take care of the little things that we're supposed to be taking that are right in front of us. And I think what I'm hearing from you is sort of can we pause and just make sure that we know why we're collecting what we're collecting, that we have a purpose, that we're connected to that purpose. And by the way, in doing this, taking the time to slow down and think about why we're actually collecting this information, we might identify also how we can use that in a more effective way than what we're doing right now. Because the one thing I've never heard in all of my 20 years of working in the association industry is we don't have enough data. People have plenty of content, right? But is it being taken care of wisely? Do we know why we have the information we do? Do we even know what information we have, which is a whole, I mean, let's start there. What information do we have? And so I just want to say thank you for some practical advice on where to start, how to think about this. I'm going to go ahead and, for those who are watching this as a video, I'm going to go ahead and place the screen up again. It has resources, it has contact information, and I'm going to go ahead and ask, what's the best way? If somebody says, we need you, we need to talk to you, we need to find out more, where should they go? Best place to reach you?
The best place for US-based organizations is actually through our colleague who's based in South Carolina, Alan Davids, who I know, KiKi, you know very well. Alan is our director of North American operations, so he will be and has actually got a very good experience in the association world, has worked in the association world for over 20 years. So Alan understands the concept of what's required for organizations. So he would be the first person that I would contact, and then he can get in touch with us and we can arrange a one-on-one session like this, a Zoom session like this, for people to talk to us. And then we can bring in Malcolm as and when we need our legal chums to come and help us. So Alan's contact details are on our website. Very simple, alan@thetrustbridge.com is his email address. So that's quite straightforward. But that's the first way that they can get in contact with us if they need help, definitely. And we are hoping, COVID permitting, that we are going to come and do some sessions in the US in October. Together with Malcolm at the Squire Patton Boggs offices in New York, Washington, and possibly Boston. So we're focusing on the East Coast initially, but that's our plan. So fingers crossed for that they don't get disrupted again.
Well, I want to thank you for the disruption. I don't know if we're ever going. There are so many, whether it's severe storms or pandemic, supply chain issues. I give up. I don't even know. But, let's just hope that we'll have a chance to see you in North America, that nothing happens between now and then. And in the meantime, I want to say thank you. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, to informing me and to informing everyone else who happens to be watching all about this aspect of data privacy that we need to be aware of, and as a great reminder for how we need to be thinking about consciously, proactively going about taking care of our data and building that trust with our organizations. So thank you.
Thank you, KiKi.
Thank you.
All right. So as I say so long to my guests, I want to thank all of you for watching. And so if you're watching live right now, or if you're watching later as a recording, I just want to say thanks for all of your support. Association Chat wouldn't be here without you. We've been going strong since 2009. And it's your support, and it's the wonderful support of leaders and subject matter experts like our guest today that ends up providing so much value to this particular program over time. So thank you for that. I hope that you've learned something of value today that you're going to be able to take with you and apply and make your lives, make your careers, make your experience professionally better. And as Joseph Campbell once said, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. So keep asking questions every day, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.